everybody, and welcome. We're so glad to be back here with you this morning after a wonderful day together yesterday. I hope you're excited to keep learning, to keep networking and meeting one another and talking about maybe working together on some of the big problems we discussed yesterday. So before we get started, I wanted to run through a few important announcements. As a reminder, check-out is at noon today, so please do that if you're checking out today. Also, you can feel free to leave your bags either with the concierge or you can leave it along the wall here in the back. If you haven't already, you're able to get a COVID test by scheduling with the concierge, so if you need to do that in order to travel, please do so. So without further ado, we'll get started. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Eamon Butler, Director of Adam Smith Institute in London, and Dr. Rainer Zettelmann, who has a PhD in history and sociology and is the author of 26 books. Please welcome our delighted guests.
So, good morning. Before we start the conversation with Eamon, I want to inform you about the results from a poll. And you can read about it in my next book that will be published in 26 languages, but now it's only published in German language and not with all the results. So you're the first one to get now the results from the survey. I commissioned this survey. It was conducted by Ipsos Mori, that is one of the leading polling institutes in the world. And the topic was what people think about capitalism. Of course, we know capitalism, for a lot of people, it's a dirty word. It has a bad connotation. And so it makes no sense only to ask people, do you like capitalism or not, as they did in many surveys. So we wanted to find out how much has it to do with the word capitalism and how much for what it stands for. And so we presented to our respondents a lot of different questions. And the first set of questions, you see them here were questions without using the word capitalism, without using it. We avoided it. For example, statements like this: the state should set the prices for rent and food and should set minimum and maximum wages, otherwise it becomes socially unfair. One statement as an example. Or we need a lot of more state intervention in the economy since the market fails time and again. And on the other hand, we had statements as, for example, I think private business alone should decide what to manufacture and what prices to charge for it. The state shouldn't interfere in this. So we had different statements, and here is the result. And I'm very happy to present this result first time in Poland, because the winner is Poland. Believe it or not, I understood in almost every country people think our country is the most anti-capitalist country. People think in every country. But it's only true for Russia, because Russia was the last one. But I agree, if Russia would be a capitalist state, I would be anti-capitalist number one, by the way. But you heard, for example, this question about the state should set prices for rents and food. I think in Poland only like 20% agreed with this statement, and in Russia like 80%. So this is the difference. So you see here, the bigger the number is, the more pro-capitalist are people in the country. And I think France is not a big surprise. And then we had other questions where we use the word capitalism. For example, this association tests. We asked people, what do you think when you think on capitalism? Do you think on prosperity, progress, or maybe on greed or innovation? And we calculated a coefficient. So the average percentage of positive and negative associations, and then we calculated a coefficient. And then we had 18 more statements. For example, capitalism is responsible for, it's responsible for all the bad things in the world. For hunger, poverty, inequality, environmental problems, climate change, war, and so on. By the way, this is every one of these statements is a chapter of my next book. The title will be In Defense of Capitalism, and there's, for example, one chapter about capitalism and inequality, and one chapter about capitalism and climate change. So I prove all these statements against capitalism. And then we did the same as we did before. We calculated the average percentage of agreement with positive or negative statements about capitalism, and in the end we had this another coefficient. Here you see some other statements. Capitalism means that there's always danger of fascism or encourages people to do their best. These were these 18 statements. So you see, this is the difference between this poll and other polls where you had only one question: do you like capitalism or not? We went much deeper in it. And here you see the overall coefficient of attitudes toward capitalism. It's similar than the one before, but there's some difference. You see Poland again at the top, followed by United States, South Korea, Japan, Czech Republic. Then we have three countries, I call them the neutral countries: Argentina, Sweden, and Brazil, and all the others are negative here. Even what was a surprise for me, UK, negative. I expected someone else, and I even expected a better result for Switzerland. But this was the result. We had the same questionnaire in all of these countries and done by the same polling institute, Ipsos Mori, so you can really compare the results. And so we could even calculate the effect of using the word capitalism. So here you see to what extent does approval for capitalism grow when the capitalist system is described without using the word. You remember the first set of questions. And it made a big difference in most of the countries. I think this is no surprise. You knew it before that capitalism is for many people a dirty word. But unfortunately, it's not only the word. As you have seen before, even when we didn't use the word, there were only 7 out of 19 countries pro-capitalist. So it's not only about the word. It's unfortunately what the word means. And here, this was a favorite question. You know, in the Corona crisis, we spoke a lot about conspiracy theories. And we confronted our respondents with two typical statements for conspiracy theories, like politicians are only puppets of forces behind them and they have to say nothing, and you can only understand politics if you know that there's a secret plan behind everything, but most people don't know this plan. And then we wanted to find out whether pro or anti-capitalists tend more to conspiracy theories. And here I was so enthusiastic to see the result, because it's very rare that it happens to a scholar that we have such a clear result. Don't compare the countries here. This is not so important to comparing the countries, but it's important that you compare always the dark bar and the bright bar. And you see, in each of these countries, anti-capitalists tend more to conspiracy theories than pro-capitalists. Usually they don't call them conspiracy theories, but it is a conspiracy. Are the lobbyists and the super rich behind everything? This is what anti-capitalists believe. You see, the only country where there was not such a big difference between pro and anti-capitalists were the United States. You see, even in the United States, more anti-capitalists believe in conspiracy theory, but the difference to pro-capitalists was not as big. I think these are the Trump people who, on the one hand, they think, yes, there is this QAnon conspiracy, but on the other hand, I like capitalism. So for the United States, the difference was not so big, but here you see in Greece, for example, or in Russia, or in Poland, and all other countries, there was even a huge difference. This is another survey. I have now only 1 minute 40 seconds to tell you something about it, but you can read everything in my book, The Rich and Public Opinion, that was published by Cato Institute. This was another survey. You know, I like surveys about social envy. We calculated something that we call the social envy coefficient. And here you can see how envious are people in different countries. You see here, of course, France France at the top, followed by Germany. You see, with capitalism, it was the other way around. France were one of the most anti-capitalist, but French people are much more envious than people in other countries. And you see there in Asian countries as Japan and South Korea, they are not envious at all against rich people. By the way, you can find it with open access, some of the results in a paper that I published in Economic Affairs, and I will publish the next paper in June in Economic Affairs. Then I have 3 papers about this topic in Economic Affairs. So, this is not the book where you can read about it. This was one of my latest books here, The Power of Capitalism, and I was very proud that your colleague, Madsen Piri, was the first one to review the book. And you can buy this book, and the other books will be published this year, next year, as mentioned, in 27 countries. And I hopefully there's no one here from any country where the book will not be published. If not, you can come to me and we will find a way to publish it in your country. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Rainer, and congratulations to all of you who've actually made it here at 9:20 in the morning after a late night and some interesting cocktails. So what we want to do is to try to engage you in this discussion, and if you have questions, short questions or short points that you'd like to make on what we've heard, that would be most welcome. But while questions are welling up inside you, perhaps I might just get the ball rolling. Rainer, I know that you haven't surveyed this specifically, but have you any idea as to what makes countries more or less pro or anti-capitalist? You said Poland is very pro-capitalist. France, well, I'm British, I know all about the French, very anti-capitalist. I'm glad to say my own country, we believe in compromise in Great Britain, was in the middle of nearly all of your charts. So we're neither one thing nor the other. You mentioned envy. I mean, is that something? Are some countries somehow more envious than others, or is there some other psychological factor?
Of course, for some of the countries, it's not so hard to answer the question. For example, take Poland at the top. In Poland, you had very negative experience with socialism, and it's not so long ago, and you had positive experience with free market economy. And so people like capitalism. The same was for Czech Republic. On the other hand, in Russia, people had very bad experience with socialism and very bad experience what happened after this. So what they think it is capitalism. So for some countries, I think it's easy to explain it, for others not so. And I presented in the book at this stage only the facts. And to explain why is that, what is of course the most important question, I promised every country where the book will be published, I will come to this country and will speak with people from the think tanks and write my next book about it, because I think it was not such a good idea sitting there in Berlin and thinking why people in Brazil are pro or anti-capitalist. So I thought it's a better idea to go to Brazil, speak there with people from the think tanks, speak there with the experts, and then I write my next book. I will write it by the end of next year, called Liberty Journey. That will bring me to these 25 countries, hopefully see a lot of you, and then I can give you, hopefully, a better answer.
Yeah, right. And do you think that is capitalism, or attitudes to capitalism, a sort of left-right thing? Is it if you're generally left-wing, you're against capitalism, and if you're generally right-wing, you're in favor? Or?
Yes, a very good question, because we had another question in our survey where we asked people to position themselves on a left-right scale. 0 would mean extreme left. Who is here with 0 in our room? Supposedly nowhere. and 10 would mean far right, extreme right, and 5 in the middle. And we asked everyone to position. For example, I would position myself 7 as an example. Maybe there are a lot of you with a 7. Maybe hands up, who's 7? Like me? Oh, no one. I'm the only one. Okay. The others are all 10? I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. No, it were different in different countries. There were 2 groups of countries. In some countries, it was this way: the more right, the more pro-capitalist. This was, for example, in Switzerland, in Sweden, in United States, in Chile. But there were other countries, as for example Germany, where most pro-capitalist people were moderate right, 7, like me. And then the people who are more far right, like 8, 9, 10, they were a little bit less pro-capitalist. So we have 2 different groups. So it means that left-right means something different in different countries.
Yeah, definitely. Just one more from me before I turn it to you guys. In my own modest little book on capitalism, I defined it really as, I said capitalism is a word with 2 bits in it, capital and ism. And capital is simply goods that you accumulate in order to make production more efficient and cheaper. And ism is a way of life. So capitalism is a way of life in which you rely on capital. So it's actually a simple concept, but the trouble is that it's picked up over the last 200 years. It's picked up a lot of baggage. And Karl Marx, talked about the dark satanic mills in the north of England and so on, and workers being oppressed and so on and so on. So it's got so much baggage. Should we actually be looking for another word to describe this phenomenon?
Yes, there's always the idea to invent a new word, but it's I don't think so much about it to find a new word. I think yesterday I heard not only a single time the word capitalism in all the speeches, and I have a different strategy. When I have my presentations with young people everywhere in the world, and of course a lot of them are anti-capitalist. I come here with my T-shirt, I don't have it today, I love capitalism. I love capitalism, I come there. And then I have a discussion. If I say I'm pro-market economy, they stole this word in Germany. Everyone is pro-market economy today. But if you say I love capitalism, then I have a discussion. And of course, if it would be only the word what people don't like, then it wouldn't be a problem. But you remember my presentation, it is not only the word. It is what the word actually means. And this is the big problem. So I think it makes no sense if you avoid the word capitalism. I think it's better, I'm proud to be pro-capitalist. If people ask me, why are you proud to be pro-capitalism? I tell them, because 200 years ago, before capitalism, 90% of the worldwide population lived in extreme poverty, and today it's less than 10%. And it's an amazing story. Not to say, yes, I know capitalism is not so good, but other systems are worse. No, I love capitalism because this is the best concept against hunger, against poverty, and to solve a lot of problems in the world. This is my approach to the world.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I think there's a difference. I had a lot to do with privatization in the UK in the 1980s, and we were dismayed when you had privatization in lots of other countries, Mexico, Romania, and so on, and it wasn't actually taking state industries and transferring them to the people. It was taking state industries and transferring them to the president's friends, and that gave privatization a really bad name in many parts of the world. And that's why I think, particularly in Eastern Europe and parts of Latin America, you actually need a new word for that. call it something else, think up a new word for the same thing. But in the case of capitalism, yes, I think we have to defend it because it's been so maligned. Now, who is awake enough to feel a question welling up inside them? All right, who's awake enough that isn't Tom Palmer that feels... Well, we've got some roving microphones, so on you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I missed that at the beginning. I'm Roy Spencer from Chicago. If I missed at the beginning about who you surveyed, how many people, what type of people you surveyed to get these results.
Yeah. Yes, a good question. The survey was conducted by Ipsos Mori. This is one of the leading, worldwide leading polling institutes, and in every country they took 1,000 people, asked 1,000 people a representative sample, and this is enough to get good results.
There's some more people in the middle, I think. This middle table, can we do this? Friend here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Scott Hodge with the Tax Foundation in Washington, D.C. Did you learn anything about how to communicate capitalism to people who are non-believers and how to change their attitudes out of any of these questions? Were there different ways of framing it? Was there different conversation? What was learned from this that can we take back and try to convince people that capitalism is good?
That's a very good question.
Yes, the most important question. To be honest, I was anti-capitalist when I was between 13 years. I started to find a Maoist group at my school till I was 23, so for 10 years. And I know it's a long process that you change your mind. And to be honest, if I write books like this, The Power of Capitalism, or my next book about the 10 fallacies of anti-capitalists, I don't think that I can convince anti-capitalists with a book, and I tell you why. Because they want to read it. They prefer to read book number 35, Why Capitalism is Evil, but we won't touch a book like that. We know before that it's all wrong. So I write my books to give people who are maybe emotionally pro-free market or anti-socialist, to give them the facts, to give them the arguments. I know that it's not everything about the facts. This is maybe a little bit our disadvantage because we have only the facts, and I compare. For example, if I discuss with people and they want to discuss about theory, I say, I don't like to discuss with you about any theory. If you compare real life economic system, real life capitalism with your book idea, it's as fair as if I would compare your real life marriage with a book about a love affair or so. You can't compare it. So I prefer to compare things that happened really, like East-West Germany, like China in the time of Mao Zedong and after Deng Xiaoping's reforms. So I present a lot of facts in my book. Of course, I know it's not all about the facts. It's a lot about emotions. But we can't give people, I don't believe in any utopia, and to be honest, I even don't believe in a libertarian utopia. I believe in no utopia. Maybe this is a little bit of disadvantage, but we have only the facts, and I think there are so many people who don't know the facts. For example, if they discuss about a topic as climate change, environmental structure, there are so many good facts you find in my next book, pro-capitalism, but a lot of people who are pro-capitalist, they don't know these facts, and so I try to give them the facts, not for the readers of the book. Even it happens sometimes. I have some reviews on Amazon that told me I was very left-leaning, anti-capitalist, and I read your book, and now I like capitalism. It happens, but I think this is not the rule.
I think you have to get people very young, I must say, to convince them. But I'm very glad that you've made a complete recovery from your early Maoism, I have to say. That's right. If only you could have a sort of injection that,
I'm interested. Who in this room was much so leftist as I was in my... Who was there? Only one. Two? Okay. Three, four.
Yeah. And Tom is still pretty left-wing. Yes, on you go, Tom.
Well, I'd like to ask a question with a very short preface. From the beginning, the word capital had a negative connotation. Fernand Braudel says all the uses had a negative moral connotation. Marx, Werner Sombart, It's all negative history, and I think it's a problem for us to pick up a word that says evil as a subtext. It also is a bad economic theory. Economic growth doesn't come about by accumulating capital. It comes about through innovation. And so it's misleading in that way also. Socialism also accumulates capital, just pointlessly, and without a positive outcome. So given how negative it is, and in some parts of the world, it's deadly to mention this term. It's just deadly. What about focus grouping alternative terms, free enterprise, innovation, entrepreneurship, open market, etc., to see if, just as good marketers, if we can do better than that? I understand it's a conversation opener when you put it on a book, and I understand that. But it also turns off 50 or 60% sometimes of your readers. So what about, with all of your expertise in public opinion, focus grouping alternatives in at least different regions of the world?
I don't believe in any appeasement policy, so I believe in attacking, always attacking, and I believe in provocation. And there are a lot of young people who even like this, the bad connotation of the word, because it helps them. You know, if you're young, you want to be like I was, maybe a little bit rebellious. Yes, I'm looking for this kind of people, and they like it that this word sounds so evil for other people. And of course, you can use different words, but I think it's very hard to invent really a new word. I heard so many suggestions, but in the end, people will tell you, but in truth, what you mean, it's like capitalism. And, no, it's not. And so it's like, you know, we have it in Germany, I don't know how is it with you, people who sell life insurance, for example, or people who sell cars, they have a broker, they have a negative image, and they invented so many new words for the things they do for selling insurance and selling cars, and so they tried, if you use a new word, maybe then people like us, but it didn't change. On the contrary, the audience had the feeling that they want to hide something, that they are ashamed about things that they do. And I have the other strategies. I'm proud about it. I love capitalism. And I tell you why. And then I have a discussion with people. But I will see. Next week, Monday, I go to Chile, then to Uruguay, to Brazil, to Argentina. Maybe after this, I tell you whether it's a good idea when I have there my presentations why I love capitalism.
I don't entirely agree with Rainer on this, I have to say, Tom. I think that for many young people, I think being bullish about capitalism is a good thing because they haven't quite made up their minds yet. And if you're saying, yeah, no, this capitalism, you've read about it, or we heard about it, and it's supposed to be bad, but no, actually it's good. It does this, and this, all these advantages. Whereas when you're talking to people who've already sort of made up their minds, there's no way that using that word will convince them. So you do, in fact, have to do other things. When we were talking about privatization in the UK, we invented a new word, because it wasn't the same as the old denationalization. And I think now for privatization, you need another word in places like Poland and Romania and Mexico, Argentina, and so on. Because the word itself has been so abused. And you're right, that capitalism is a word which was coined as an insult. It was designed to be negative, so we've got a bit of an uphill struggle. But I think Ryan's right that with young people, yes, you can be bullish and you can say, yeah, this is the real deal, and they like that. And then as they mature, it's more difficult. Who else has got a question? Just something brief. Where are you off to?
Yeah. Roxana Nicola from the Foundation for the Advancement of Liberty in Spain, but originally from Romania, so yes, we hate
Right.
the N word, the P word, let's say. I'm curious to know, out of the sample of the survey, do you know which percentage was conducted among young people? Because it's very important from a strategical point of view for us to know if we are losing the youth or not. We have a chance to recover them. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, very good question. We will have a lot of results then in the book more in detail about income groups, about age, about gender, and all this. And with the age groups, there is a difference, but it's not in the same direction in every country. It's not as in every country young people are more pro or anti-capitalist. The only country where we have a very huge difference is the United States. Because in the United States, people older than 60 years old are extremely pro-capitalist, more than all others. And young people younger than 30 years, they are not extreme anti-capitalist, but it was like, I call them neutral. But it was a huge difference between the very pro-capitalist above 60 and the other. But in other countries, there was not such a big difference. The same difference, by the way, was in our other survey about social envy, that older Americans were not at least envious against rich people, but young Americans were very much. But on the other hand, in Italy, for example, with this, I speak now not about the capitalism survey, but the social envy survey. In Italy, young people were not as much envious against rich people. They liked rich people, but old Italians were extremely envious and anti-rich. So it's different in different countries. But if I speak about gender, it was in every country. I think only in Korea it was the same, but in all other countries it was that women were more anti-capitalist than men. In some countries only a small difference, in others a little bit bigger difference, but in all countries it was women being more anti-capitalist than men. And with income groups, in some countries you had results as you maybe would expect, that people with lower income were more anti-capitalist and people with high income were more pro-capitalist, but this was not true for every country. There were also countries, as in France, for example, even people who earn a lot of money, they are anti-capitalist.
Yeah, that's because they're all government administrators. We certainly find that older people, particularly in academia, the professors are always anti-capitalist, and if you go into any university bookshop in the UK, certainly, and in many other countries, you find rows and rows of anti-capitalist books that they've recommended, whereas the kids are much more questioning, and we often get kids who come to us and they say, well, my professor's terribly left-wing, I don't think this is right, what should I do? Should I write an essay that's left-wing and get an A, or should I write something which I believe to be true and get a fail? I always say, well, no, write what the professor wants you to write, and then once you've graduated, then you can talk free markets. So there you go. Anybody else with a friend at the front here? Thank you.
Good morning, Jonathan Ailing from New Zealand. You mentioned effectively that tragedy is often, unfortunately, a very good teacher, and we see, in the experiences of countries like Poland, that they have responded in pro-capitalist ways because of that experience. I grew up in Mozambique, which was communist as well, had a very tragic past, and when I moved to the West, I was surprised at the way that we haven't learned from other countries' experiences in that same way. So are you optimistic that the West can continue to embrace pro-capitalism without enduring tragedy, or do you think, unfortunately, that may be a necessity as we head in that trajectory to have a demise of some kind?
I'm not quite sure whether I got the question. Can you help me?
Can you say it, just summarize it slowly, and English is not Raina's first language.
Apologies. Do you think the West will learn from the mistakes of other countries that have had anti-capitalist policies, or do you think we have to have our own tragedy to learn?
Will the West learn from other countries, or do we have to go through our own tragedies before we change our views? Do we need to feel the bad stuff before we can talk about the good stuff?
You mean whether it should come to a very bad end before we change in a positive direction?
Yeah.
Yes, this is the theory that things should become worse till they start to going better, and it's an experience in history. I have the story here in my book about a lot of countries. I have it here about China. You know, it was absolutely disaster at the end of Mao's time when 88% of Chinese population lived in extreme poverty, and this was the start of economic reforms of Deng Xiaoping. It was the same in the UK in the 70s, where it was a total disaster there, the so-called democratic socialism before Maggie Thatcher came with their reforms, or in the United States before Reagan came. You know, it was not as bad as in the UK, but it was really bad. Or in Germany, we had these reforms in the beginning of the 2000s from Gerd Schröder at this time, and before we had 6 million people. But these are examples for this. Yes, sometimes it has to become very bad before it starts better, but it's not automatically. There are a lot of other examples. Think about German history. What happens 1929 and after this years when we had this economic crisis and Adolf Hitler came to power, National Socialism. So if people believe that automatically if things turn bad, it's not like a Hollywood movie where the happy end is guaranteed in history. It's always possible that things become worse. So history is open, but it is correct. There are opportunities in big crises. So yesterday I discussed with Natalia about the Ukraine, and you know, this is with the war, the biggest crisis ever. And on the other hand, she told me, yes, but it's an opportunity for the time after the war to have some economic reforms that we should have before, but that we hadn't before. And now, yesterday, I had the good luck to sit behind this, our speaker, member of parliament from the Ukraine, and he told me what I didn't know before, that 1 month ago they abolished a lot of regulations and that they reduced taxes to an unbelievable 2% and something like this. And what he told me, we want to make this changes permanent, maybe. Don't know whether it will happen, but of course, in every crisis there's an opportunity, but there's not an automatical outcome. It can always turn worse, and I know as a German what I'm talking about.
2%, that's outrageously high. I just like on that saying, on that question, I would, being British, I can see both sides of the argument, of course, and in the 1970s, I used to have arguments with Lord Harris of High Cross, who of course ran the Institute of Economic Affairs in London. And he said things are getting, you know, so bad under the socialist government, and things just getting worse and worse and worse. And eventually, you know, what we want is a real crisis, and then we'll have to do something. Well, that sort of happened, and Mrs. Thatcher came in 1979 and changed everything. But I used to argue against him because I said, no, I think people get used to these things. Things get, you know, it's like the book 1984. Things just get worse and worse and worse. And it takes somebody with great imagination to look back and say, were things always as bad as this? You know, we've got to do something. That's a very unusual person. Most people just get on with it and they get used to it. And they try to get their way around the rules and the regulations and the taxes, and they find their little scams and all the rest of it. So
yes, I agree. This can happen, absolutely. Yesterday I read a paper, or 2 days before, about Argentina, because I go there now, and they have, since 100 years now, a decrease. They were one of the richest nations in the world 100 years ago, and it lasted now 100 years. So it can happen. People get used to it. It's this way. Life is this way.
Yeah, it's sad to see it. And if you go to somewhere like Argentina, with a gap of a few years between, you just see it declining, and the locals don't see it declining at all. And I think a wider thing on your point is, I always say it's like the story of the two fish. There's a big fish and a small fish, and the big fish says, how do you like the water? and the small fish says, "What's water?" You know, because they get used to the water. They don't even. It's like the air. We don't even think about it. And I think this is one of the problems in the West, that we've got all of these institutions protecting liberty and protecting justice in particular, and we've got education and so on. And there's an awful lot of countries that don't have those institutions, or those institutions are corrupted, and they're run by, the judiciary is run by friends of the president. And sometimes we give our arguments, and we don't realize that these arguments are just inappropriate in somewhere that the justice system just doesn't work. So what do? You've got to fix that first somehow. So I think we've got to be mindful of what we've got, and be conscious that there are many people who haven't got that, and that's one of the reasons why they may think very differently. We've got time for about 1.5 questions, I think.
Yes, but only to add something, if I may, because this is so very important point, I think so. People forget why a country became successful. It happened in Chile. You can see it right now. Chile is by far the most, prosperous economy if you compare it with all other South American countries. They had so much success, but they forget about it. Now, in our survey, it's one of the most anti-capitalist countries. There are only 5 countries that are more anti-capitalist than Chile, according to our poll. So I was not surprised about the outcome of the last election. They forget why they were successful. The same happens in China. Look, what happened in China? Deng Xiaoping started with his pro-market reforms, introducing private property, and all those economic brokers in the last 30 years. As my friend from Beijing University, Wang Chang, told me always, it was not because of the state, but in spite of the state. But people forget about it now. And now, if you see the last ranking from Heritage Foundation about economic freedom, China lost 10 percentage points, what never happened before. Now they go the other way, and would be very dangerous for, because they forgot what was the reason. Why could we reduce the rate of extreme poverty from 88 to 1%? It was introducing private property, market, elements of free market, and they forget it, and they go the other way back. The same may happen in Chile, for example.
We've got time for about half a question.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody with half a question? Oh, somebody at the back. You have to be very quick, and very quick response as well.
Just briefly on what Tom said before, the use of the term of capitalism.
Yeah.
So why we love what capitalism does is because it sets people free. As Rainer said before, you get people out of poverty, you help set people, like you emancipate women, queer people, and all that kind of stuff. So the ends is what matters, not the term. And is it really smart to get people who like to be bullish about things, who like to provocate, and then maybe encapsulate yourselves in this capitalism team, but not actually convince other people? So don't we have to think about the terms we use in order to convince people to get to the ends?
I'm an author of books, and I think in this career, I can tell the bookseller now, there are hundreds of books against capitalism. Here you have one pro-capitalism. If I tell them, I have a book, Why Innovation is Good, so, yes, who can understand what it is about, yes? The reaction to the German title of my book is better as the English title is, capitalism is not the problem, but the solution. And there were a lot of people. Finally, someone says it. I take the book, and I want these people first to give these people arguments. I have to reach out to them. If I would have a title, why we should embrace innovation or something like this to create new words, people wouldn't understand what it is about. So.
Friends, let me thank Rainer for the work he's done, but also his presentation here today. You heard it here first. And thank you all for joining us this morning. You can collect your early riser medals on the way out. At 10:15, we have our first pair of concurrent breakout sessions, and one is free trade in Europe and beyond, and the other one is tax and competition among and within Europe. Thank you all very much.
Let me thank you as well,
See you
Simon,
there.
not only for this, but I have to tell you, he helped me so much. He and Brad and Tom helped me so much with, I couldn't publish this book in 27 countries if there weren't Eamon, Brad, and Tom. So thank you, and thank you for, there are a lot of other people here in this room. It's for you.